All right, so we're going to look at another accumulator program. We want to write a module that asks the user how many numbers they wish to enter, then finds and outputs the average of those numbers. In this case, the output should be a complete sentence, but it doesn't need to reference those input values. So once we have the numbers that they're inputting, we don't need to keep them. We could think about how we might do this as an improvement to the program going forward. So I'm just going to sort of set up our start place, which is, step one, analyze. And I'm just going to go ahead and write up here the specifications and the design. And what are we doing? We're going to ask the user how many numbers they want to enter. And then we're going to have them enter those numbers and find their average. So, and just, we need to understand what that's doing. So I've already opened up a module in Python where I've given it a name, average capital N.py, my name, or that'll be your name, the class. And then I described the module. This module asks the user to input how many numbers they wish to enter, then finds and outputs the average of those numbers. And I think I'll go ahead and save it as averageN so that we can just run it later. Add the .py there. Yeah. So we're analyzing the problem. We're going to kind of dip into the specifications at the same time. So we need to get the number of numbers that the user is going to input. I'm just going to find a color here. So for the input, there's two types of input. One is this N. This is coming from the user, and it's the number of values that they're going to enter. So let's suppose that they enter in 4. So then what's going to happen? We need to have the user enter those 4 values. So in the design process, we're going to need to run a loop, in this case, 4 times. And in that loop, we're going to have to get a number from the user. And then we're going to have to add that number to the total, sum total. Oh, we don't have a total. So because, what is the average of numbers? We take the total sum of all the numbers and we divide by however many numbers we have, the number of values. So we're kind of trying to figure out, well, how are we going to do this? So this is exactly how we're going to do it. We're going to figure out how many numbers they have. Then we're going to run a loop to get each number from the user and add it to a total. And then after we get those numbers added to the total, the average is the total sum of those numbers divided by the number of values. So right in here is the accumulator where we're adding something to a total inside that loop. And so that means we have to somehow start with a total. And so what total are we starting with? Well, if we don't have any numbers, the total is 0. So we have to initialize that variable to 0 before we get into this loop. So we have to give it a name. We have to give these other variables names. So that's like part of the specification. So I'm kind of doing these 3 steps all at once. And I come back in here. And so we have our N, that's the number of values they're going to enter. We have our total, which is going to be the sum of all the values. So maybe you could call it total sum if you want. That's a good name. And it's going to start off at 0. And then this number that they're entering, we're only using it inside this loop. So we could use a little n for it if we wanted, or we could call it, temporary or just number. Number is a nice name. Let's call it that. And that, again, is coming from the user. So we're going to get the number of times, the number of values they want to enter from the user. We're going to initialize the sum to 0. Then we're going to run a loop. Well, does the loop always run 4 times? No. If this n is 5, the loop's going to run 5 times. If this n is 7, it's going to run 7 times. So whatever n is how many times this loop is going to run. So we're actually going to loop n times. And each time we run through that loop, we're going to get a number from the user, and we're going to update our total or accumulate to our total. Okay, and then after that loop's done, we can compute the average. and output it. So I've kind of combined those processes, analyze, specifications, which is like naming those variables, and the design kind of in the same, at the same time. There's a lot of overlap between when those steps happen. They don't necessarily happen individually, but they generally are all going to happen before we go over to the right-hand side of the table and start implementing our code, which is step 4. So we jump over here to step 4. We're going to tell the user what this is going to do. This program will find the average of numbers you enter, of user entered numbers. Even though there's more than one place where we're going to get input, let's start our input here. And we're going to say capital N equals, because it's a number, we're going to go eval and then input. And then we're going to say enter the quantity of numbers to be averaged. I don't know if that's the best language there, but I think with us coding it, we'll understand it. Maybe later we can modify that to say it a little more cleanly. Enter the number of numbers to be averaged, but I want to stay away from number of numbers. So we're going to get that number from the user, and then we're going to run a loop. But before we run that loop, we need to set up this total sum. We need to initialize this total sum. Maybe I'll just comment on that as well, just so you guys understand what we're doing there and why. We're initializing the total sum to 0. Well, we can say initializing the total sum, and we're going to say total sum equals 0. And then we'll jump into our process. Now, our process is also involving getting some input, but we don't need to say that. It's going to be clear from the code itself. So we're going to say for indexing variable I in range. Now, if they entered n, it was 4, we would do 4. If it's 5, it's 5. 7, it's 7. So the n, capital N, is the range that we're using for I in range n. The only reason I use a capital N is because I put it up here in the name, average capital N, just camel case that. So that's why this is a capital N instead of a lowercase n. It doesn't really matter, but it's what I chose to do. We need to get a number from the user. I could call it temporary number or just number equals. Again, because it's a number, we're going to go eval, input, just say enter a number. They are going to enter this number however many numbers they're going to average. And then each time they enter it, we're going to add it to the total sum by setting up an accumulator. Total sum equals whatever total sum is when we come to this step in the loop, plus that number that we're adding on. Each time through the loop, the total sum is going to add up. When we are done with that loop, we're going to find the average, which is equal to that total sum divided by n, capital N. And then we want to do our output. And I talked about this. A lot of times I want the output to reference the input as well as the output. So you might say, oh, the average of 20, 30, and 40 is 30. But here I didn't keep track of those numbers that the user is entering. So that's where I talk about, if you wanted to improve this, you could do that. We're not going to. We're just going to make a sentence that says the average of the numbers is, quote, comma, and then I'm going to print the average here. And then I want to end my sentence with a period. So I'm going to go end equals, quote, period, \n. Not only adding a period, but a \n, so that if someone comes on later to print something after this, they're expecting that to print on the next line, and that \n will allow that to happen. Okay, we're going to run it. You can always pause the videos to get a chance to get things typed in and make sure it's working. I'm going to hit run. and also, the intention here is that you're actually coding along with this, doing it after the fact or doing it, copying and pasting. That's not really going to help you as much as it would if you just kind of can code along with me, pause the video as needed or speed it up, whatever is the case. Okay, we'll run this guy. And then I might pick numbers that I know how to average. So let's start with two numbers. We're going to go 10 and 20, and the average of those is 15. The average of the numbers is 15. And I'll just type main again. We could try a few things. Let's say I have, if I enter 0, I think it's going to be a problem. Yeah, because we can't divide by 0. So that's a place where we could potentially look to improve the program, is making it something that will run regardless of the user input. But right now, we're just going to assume that the user knows what they're doing. Let's go 3 numbers. Let's go 10, 20, and 30. So the average of those should be 20, and it is. I haven't ran into it yet, but what if I entered something like, 5, 6, 56, 32. Oh, I don't want to enter 56 numbers. I'm just gonna get an error. I forgot the first thing it wants is the number of numbers. So let's go 4 numbers. If I enter dividing by 4, let's go an error again. Let's divide by 3, main. So I want to do 3 numbers, and I want to do something that's not divisible by 3. So I want to go 17, 13, that'll be 30, and 20, that's 50. So I end up with this 16.666666. I don't really want that in my output. Nothing wrong with it, but I can improve this a little bit by just rounding that output here. Round average, say, to 2 decimal places. And then I need to add that comma in for the end statement. And then we'll run it again. And we'll go 3 numbers again, and we'll just go 13, 17, and 20. And you'll see that it rounds it to 16. Oh, to 2 decimal places, 16.67. The average of the numbers. So I might want to say the average of which numbers? The average of the entered numbers, maybe. The average of or maybe just the average is. Get rid of the numbers. The average is, because they have the numbers above here. Run it. Let's try to just enter one number. If I do one number, let's say it's 92, then the average should be 92. Great. Okay, so that's working. I'm going to stop the video and mention real quick, here's the accumulator happening. Total sum equals total sum plus number. That's it. Hopefully that's helpful.